They took your name, your land, your language, but not your legacy. Reclaim it at AfricanAncestry.com.
Can you explain how the current potential future changes to the Department of Education could impact American children, the economy, and the country's overall intellectual culture?
Yeah, I would love to. The Department of Education really is under attack by the new presidential administration. And I think it's important historical context, which is that the modern day Department of Education largely came about because of Black activism. The first Department of Education was put in place post-Reconstruction by Black legislators who were saying basically all children should have access to education that is supported by the public. It's a public good, just like you want to build roads and you want to have shipping across rivers and making sure that there's ways that you have commerce, that educating young people fits inside of that public good, public need, federal infrastructure that's really important. Because, of course, up until then and even after then, it wasn't just Black children that didn't have access to education. Also, white students and, indigenous students who were not of the wealthy class, right, whose families couldn't pay for an education. So this whole concept of public education, like many things that are decent about some of the things that are in government now, came about because of the intervention of Black activists and educators and leaders. So I think that's really important. And so what you see then decades later is that over the years, as you have an educated populace, you have a one that's more challenging to things like authoritarianism, more challenging to things that are undemocratic because they're what? Educated. And so this idea that education is just creating people to be laborers, right, to help produce things for capitalists, isn't the only story. It also helps to develop critical thinking, not always, because we know the way our education system is structured, it tries to limit that.
I appreciate you saying that.
But it is actually what those visionaries had in mind when they said, we want an educated public, we want Black kids to have education, we even want these white kids to have an education because perhaps that community will behave differently too, particularly those that were poor and working class white folks. So now, of course, as you have a regime that comes in that is moving towards authoritarianism, that doesn't want pushback from the public on the decisions that it makes and the moves that it makes, of course, one of the first things that's attacked in the first 100 days is the Department of Education. One, any kind of curriculum that talks about what they call critical race theory or diversity, equity, inclusion. A lot of folks hear these terms and they're just thinking, oh, well, I don't know what that is. Maybe it's not necessary. It's not like math or science or reading. But no, these are things like the Black history that we've made sure is in the curriculum and critical race theory, this idea that you're looking at things and you're examining it through this critical race lens is a part of critical thinking, right? It's a part of building better societies and communities. That's a threat to authoritarianism. So this move to gut the Department of Education from its funding, to limit what schools can teach in the states based on the funding they can get from the federal government. So therefore the feds can come in and say, well, you guys teach a course on Malcolm X, so you're not going to get your federal funds. We don't want that. Or you have a course where they talk about white privilege and white supremacy, and so you're not going to get your federal funding. Those are the types of things that are being set up in the current structure. So there's the limiting of funds based on what the curriculum is, or any kind of way that you're trying to make sure that your school reflects the community it's in, which they call DEI. All those things will limit your federal funds. But who will be hurt the most? Students with disabilities, students and parents out there that are listening, a lot of kids on IEPs. Now, when we went to school, schools were divided, even in an all-Black school. If a child had learning differences, as we know of them now, they put them in special ed. But now students have an independent education plan. Those are under threat, and that allows a child to be in class with everybody else, all their peers, and they learn differently. Maybe they need their stuff sent to them in an audio way. Maybe they need more time on the test. Maybe they need to take their test in a room that's not distracting, and they'll do just as well. So these kind of IEP programs, 504 programs, it's called different things in different states, are under threat. So then again, pushing students who learn differently into like special ed programs or to isolated, segregated situations that we know students don't thrive.
One of the things I want to bring up in IEP, because I taught for years, and I noticed that like IEP has a bad rap because of certain school districts. So for instance, what I witnessed personally, I've had classes where there were over, say, 18 kids with IEPs. Now out of the 18, maybe 13 like really needed them, and they really needed an adult with them. So I think one of the critiques IEP has is schools who aren't providing the services they're supposed to provide with the funding that they get.
Absolutely. There's not a lot of compliance, and things need to be improved. They actually need more resources, not less, especially as we see more students who are coming up who, I don't know, the first 3 years of their education, it was remote because of COVID. People have experienced a lot of loss because of the pandemic and all the other factors around the world. So the IEP program can be, underutilized and misused.
Compliance. They need better compliance, and they need more adults. Push-ins, I don't know what the proper term they call them, but more adults to help the children,
More adults to help the children, more staffing. But all of that is under threat when you are cutting the funds.
Things going to happen to Tier 1 schools and their funding.
Well, we don't know yet what's going to happen ultimately, but we do know that this idea of state control, this idea that states can use public funds to fund even private Christian type schools is going to disrupt the whole thing in terms of a very unequal system. That's not to say that things weren't already bad, right? But it's almost like the argument with Medicaid. Anybody on Medicaid would tell you, ugh, it's terrible, but that don't mean you just take away health care altogether.
Last thing on the school, could you elaborate more in regards to the transference of funding, public funding for private schools?
Yeah, it's happening in a couple different ways. So the states are going to get a lot of leeway. And again, I'm saying what could happen under what is being done currently in the Department of Education to say, and this is happening in some states already, we'll fund religious schools through public funding, like just directly, just straight up.
Religious schools.
Christian, religious, evangelical schools, Mormon schools, all under the umbrella of Christian schools. Perhaps some other schools could slide in there and say, hey, this is what the state law is, give us some too. We don't know, but we know that who's pushing it are these entities that have Christian schools already, and they want to be able to fund those through public dollars. The other way that it's happening is through vouchers, right? So people are able to say, well, my kid goes to private school, and I pay property taxes to public school, so I want to get a voucher to reimburse me for my private school. And so what that is, then pulling money out of the state's public education dollars to give to parents to put their kids in private schools. Some people think this is good. They're like, oh, well, that means I can go to private school. Private school does not have to take any student at all the way your public school does. You could have a voucher, and that private school could say, we do not want Jamal, we do not want Rashid in our school, and yet public funds are going to that school.